An update this morning on a story we've been following since 2019.
Several calls were made to 911 the night they died.
3 bodies, 1 house, and a story that was handed to the public before the investigation had even started. January 10th, 2019. A San Antonio sheriff's deputy walks through the door of a nearly $1 million home in a gated, guarded neighborhood and finds a mother and her 2 daughters dead on the 2nd floor. The man who called it in is outside on the lawn, on his knees, hands pressed to his face. Deputies later note in their official report that he appeared to be crying. When they got closer, they saw there were no tears. Within days, investigators would rule it a murder-suicide. The mother, they concluded, killed her own daughters, then turned the gun on herself. Almost everyone who actually knew her rejected that conclusion immediately. And 7 years later, so does the sheriff's own paperwork. No one has ever been charged. No court has ever ruled on what actually happened inside that house. And the people who love Nichol Olsen, Alexa Montez, and London Bribiescas the most are still begging, publicly, repeatedly, for someone, anyone, in a position of power to finally tell them the truth. This is the story of a woman who spent her whole life clawing her way out of chaos, only to die inside the safest-looking house in Texas. And it's the story of a case that has sat frozen for so long that the victims' own families have stopped asking for it to be reopened, because right now, it's never really been closed. Welcome to Crime Trail Archives. Before we go any further, let's go back to where this all started. Nichol Olsen was 37 years old. She had spent most of her adult life as a single mother, working her way from restaurant shifts into a steady career as a hairstylist, building a client list 1 appointment at a time. People who knew her describe her consistently hardworking, warm, fiercely protective of her children. Even after she moved into a life of relative financial comfort, she kept her job. She kept her own income. Friends later pointed to that detail as proof of who she really was. A woman who never fully let go of her independence, no matter how secure things appeared on the surface. Her older daughter, Alexa Montez, was 16. She was a cheerleader at Clark High School with plans to become an OB/GYN. Her father, Carlos Montez, shared custody with Nichol and later described their co-parenting relationship as easy and conflict-free. Her younger daughter, London Bribiescas, was 10 years old, a 5th grader who loved performing and had recently been signed up to audition for a national talent competition. Her father, Hector Bribiescas, also shared custody. In the summer of 2016, Nichol met Charlie Wheeler, full name Charles Edward Wheeler. He came from a wealthy oil and gas family out of Fredericksburg, Texas. He built his own money early, first through rodeo winnings, then through a security company, and by his mid-20s, he was reportedly bringing in a significant income of his own. Court records also show an earlier pattern of legal trouble, including a public intoxication arrest and a DUI stop, both of which were resolved with charges dismissed or reduced. In 2017, he bought a home inside the gated Anaqua Springs ranch community. Within the year, Nichol and her daughters had moved in with him. On the surface, it looked like she had finally found the stability she had spent her entire adult life working toward. It is important to state clearly, before going further, that Charlie Wheeler has never been arrested or charged in connection with these deaths, and has denied any wrongdoing through his attorneys. What follows is what investigators, court filings, and people close to the family have said on the record. None of it amounts to a legal finding of guilt. What multiple friends would later describe was a difficult picture behind that gate. In May of 2017, Nichol showed up to a professional photo shoot with a bruise under her eye. Her friend Vanessa, who ran the jewelry business Nichol was working with at the time, asked what happened. Nichol said she and Charlie had argued and didn't say anything further. Later that same year, an anniversary trip to Galveston ended with hotel security asking Charlie to leave the property after another argument. According to Vanessa's later account, Charlie left Nichol stranded there afterward, taking her phone and her belongings with him when he left. In January of 2018, Vanessa recalled a night out. with Nichol interrupted repeatedly by phone calls from Charlie, one of which included him telling Vanessa directly that she was lucky to be trusted with Nichol's company at all. Later that year, at the Anaqua Springs home, Vanessa said Charlie became upset over something minor and told Nichol to get out of the pool to clean up after her daughters in front of guests. It was the last time Vanessa visited. She later told Nichol she looked like a guest in her own home. Court records confirmed that patrol units were dispatched to the address 4 separate times over the following 12 months. The specific reasons behind those calls have never been made public. What almost no one around her knew at the time was that Nichol had already begun quietly searching for her own apartment, roughly a month before her death. On the morning of January 9th, 2019, Nichol received an email from the Grand at the Dominion Apartments, a complex she had toured in person on December 30, August of the previous year. The message confirmed that the 3-bedroom floor plan she wanted was now available for move-in. That same day, she confirmed a client appointment with her coworker Bethany for the following morning, and she spoke by phone with Hector about London's upcoming audition. None of it reads like a woman planning to end her life, or anyone else's, within hours. That night, according to Charlie's own account to investigators, he and Nichol got into a serious argument around 10 o'clock. He said he left the house and drove to stay with a relative. Security footage at the community's gated entrance confirms his vehicle leaving at that time. From there, the account becomes harder to reconcile with the hours that followed. Instead of turning around or calling for a welfare check, Charlie spent the night sending a series of text messages to Nichol, to both of her daughters, and to her brother Justin, describing growing concern about her emotional state. At one point that night, a message was sent from Alexa's phone that raised concern about her mother's condition. Investigators have been careful to point out that phone records can confirm a message was sent. They cannot confirm who was physically holding the device when it was typed. Just before 11 o'clock, 5 calls went out from Nichol's phone. 1 went to Charlie's mother, unanswered. 4 went to 911. Only one of those calls connected, and when it did, the dispatcher heard nothing on the line, no voice, no explanation, before the call disconnected. It happened too quickly for the location to be traced, and no return call was made. The next morning, after sending more unanswered messages to Justin, Charlie drove back through the community gates just after 9 o'clock, went inside, and placed his own call to 911. On that call, before any investigator had examined the scene, he offered a specific theory of what had happened, telling the dispatcher it looked like his girlfriend had killed her daughters and then herself. The deputies who responded that morning documented several details that would shape the case for years afterward. Charlie was found in the front yard, appearing distraught, though the official incident report specifically notes the absence of visible tears. He was brought in for questioning and gave investigators his account of the argument and his whereabouts overnight. Upstairs, deputies located the 3 victims in close proximity to one another, on the same floor. The original incident report notes evidence of blood found in multiple areas of the home, including near a bathroom doorway. Sheriff Javier Salazar, addressing reporters within days, confirmed that 2 of the deaths were being treated as homicides, while declining at that point to characterize the 3rd. On January 14th, the Bexar County Medical Examiner issued its official findings. Alexa and London's deaths were ruled homicides. Nichol's death was ruled a suicide. The firearm recovered at the scene was legally registered to Charlie, and according to later civil litigation, was typically kept unsecured in his bedroom. Gunshot residue testing, it was later confirmed, had been conducted on both Nichol and Charlie. Those specific results were never made public. To this day, the full autopsy and toxicology reports for all 3 victims have never been publicly released, with authorities citing the ongoing nature of the investigation as the reason. The ruling did not settle the case. If anything, it complicated it further. Sheriff Salazar named Charlie a person of interest almost immediately, while publicly declining to fully endorse his own medical examiner's conclusion, telling reporters his department's independent investigation could either confirm the ruling or contradict it entirely. Weeks later, he raised a third theory, an unknown intruder, one that required explaining away the absence of any forced entry and the absence of an unfamiliar face on the community's extensive camera network. It never gained traction and quietly disappeared from his public statements. Separately, Salazar stated publicly that a question about one daughter's paternity had come up in connection with communications reviewed during the investigation. He later walked the comment back after no supporting evidence emerged, and it has never been substantiated since. In the meantime, the people who knew Nichol best were making their disbelief public. Rick Wright, a longtime friend and fellow hairstylist, told reporters within days that he believed she had to have been killed, describing her as someone who loved being alive far too much for the official story to make sense. Aaron Seaman, a friend of more than a decade, said publicly that too many details in the case failed to add up and that everyone who actually knew Nichol already understood, in their own minds, what had not happened inside that house. Jacqueline Galbraith, another friend, said this was not something anyone close to Nichol could simply move past. Carlos and Hector said much the same, independently, in separate interviews. Charlie, for his part, retained attorneys early in the process and, according to reporting at the time, limited further cooperation with investigators. Neither father has said publicly that Charlie reached out to them after the deaths. On January 2020, 12 days after the deaths, the FBI joined the investigation in an assisting role, a step the sheriff's office confirmed was unusual for a case at this stage. Later, a nonprofit called Project Absentees, made up of retired federal agents, began reviewing the case at the family's request. Its spokesperson, Tuleta Copeland, a retired FBI agent with 17 years of experience, stated publicly that in her professional opinion, there was no basis to call Nichol a murderer, and recommended investigators explore geofencing technology, a method capable of tracing phone activity to specific locations, to help close gaps the original cell tower data alone could not answer. Around the same period, a search warrant obtained by investigators described the crime scene in official language as very complex, phrasing that pushed directly against the tidy narrative the public had originally been given. By the end of 2020, the sheriff's office signaled it was close to finalizing its findings, then reversed course entirely and sent the case back to a cold case unit for further review. Sheriff Salazar publicly stated that the family's retained attorney appeared to be seeking to profit from the tragedy, a comment that drew sharp criticism from both families. The family's attorney, Joe Holscher, responded by pointing out that the deadline for the families to file civil claims was approaching, and suggested publicly that the sheriff's sudden reversal was less about new evidence and more about running out the clock on those filings. That remains Holscher's characterization. The sheriff's office has not agreed with it. In January of 2021, Carlos Montez filed the first civil lawsuit against Charlie, alleging gross negligence and wrongful death. The suit claimed that Charlie knew, on the night he left, that Nichol's behavior was erratic, escalating, and potentially threatening, and that he chose to leave anyway. Later that same year, Hector Bribiescas filed a second, separate lawsuit, alleging that Charlie kept a loaded, unsecured handgun beside his bed and had personally taught Nichol how to use it. Charlie's attorneys responded to both filings by calling the claims false and unsupported by evidence. Neither lawsuit has resulted in a criminal charge, and both remain contested claims rather than established facts. Tension between the families and the sheriff's office continued to build. Reporting at the time described the return of the victims' personal belongings to their families as unusually impersonal, deepening the sense that the case was not being handled with the care it demanded. Separately, Salazar said the family's attorney had sent him emails he characterized as bullying, a distinct conflict from the earlier profiting comment. On what would have been London's 12th birthday, her family publicly announced their support for a Texas red flag law, legislation that would allow courts to temporarily remove firearms from individuals considered a danger to themselves or others. The family said publicly they believed such a law, had it existed, might have changed the outcome of that January night. Public support for the family continued to grow throughout this period. A fund created under the name Search for Truth raised more than $50,000 in a single day. A separate fund created in London's memory, benefiting the Austin Zoo, a place she had loved visiting, raised close to $2,000 from 40 donors within 24 hours. By September of 2022, London's family had lost patience with the local investigation entirely. Hector and his sister, Emma Mancha Sumner, sent a formal letter through attorney Joe Holscher to the Texas Attorney General, requesting the case be removed from the Bexar County Sheriff's Office and reassigned to the Texas Rangers. The letter named Sheriff Salazar directly, accusing him of failing the girls and breaking earlier promises to release the results of his department's investigation. The Attorney General's office confirmed receiving the request and said it had been referred for internal review. The Texas Rangers never issued a public response. Salazar later stated publicly that he would welcome a Texas Rangers investigation into the case, a position that stood in contrast to his earlier defensiveness. To this day, no criminal charges have been filed against anyone in connection with the deaths of Nichol Olsen, Alexa Montez, or London Bribiescas. Here is where most existing coverage of this case stops, and where this one does not. As of March 2026, a newly obtained sheriff's report has surfaced physical details that complicate the official narrative even further. According to that report, investigators recovered multiple firearms from inside the home that night, not only the single weapon found near Nichol's body. The report also documents a projectile recovered from a wall in the upstairs hallway, a detail that had never previously been made public. Sheriff Salazar told a local investigative team that current evidence points to a high probability that at least one of the three victims was not killed by gunfire initially, raising the possibility that someone may have moved or been moved after an initial injury and before a fatal shot was fired. Salazar also clarified a separate detail that had gone unspecified for years. Some of the material originally collected at the scene and assumed to be blood evidence had only ever been generically labeled a blood swab, meaning its exact nature was never conclusively confirmed during the original investigation. The Bexar County Sheriff's Office maintains that the case's official disposition remains unchanged unless new evidence formally reopens it. But for a case that was effectively decided within days of the deaths back in 2019, a report like this, 7 years later, is a significant admission that the original picture handed to the public was incomplete. Nichol's son, Skylar Nobles, was an adult living independently at the time of the deaths. In the months that followed, he spoke publicly about what it feels like to keep expecting a phone call that never comes. He's still waiting for someone to tell him what actually happened behind those gates. He made one simple, direct request of investigators to keep looking. That request still has not been fully answered. No one has been charged. No court has ruled on what actually happened inside that house. And as of this year, the physical evidence itself is still raising questions the original ruling never accounted for. Cases like this stay open not because there is nothing left to find, but because someone keeps finding more. If you want the next update the moment it breaks, or cases like this one followed until the truth actually comes out, subscribe to Crime Trail Archives.